carriage moved on and began to cross the bridge, and it was, for the most part, silent, because this was then John Lewis's moment. This was the moment of the ages and his crossing over. So symbolism in so many ways. Of course, recognizing 1965, recognizing 2020 and his passing, and the life that has gone and the changes in America since. But we all have bridges to cross. We all have to face dangers on the other side at times in our lives, so everyone could feel a connection to John Lewis, what he did, what he has done, and why they will want to remember him always. Frederick.
And Cornell, let me get your thoughts on yet what seems to be another apex, a moment where there is a push, there are petitions to have this Edmund Pettus Bridge name renamed John Lewis Bridge, and the late congressman had been asked about that, several times, along the way, and didn't see that was necessary or fitting. Is that because, as his brothers and sisters mentioned yesterday in a memorial service, time and time again, he was so humble?
That's right.
This is all in remembrance of a special tribute to Brother John Lewis. That was one of the greatest civil rights movements leaders that stood shoulder to shoulder with Martin Luther King towards fair enterprise and being treated fairly here in America pertaining to equal rights. They are crossing over the very same bridge that Brother John wound up getting his skull crashed in down in Solomon, Alabama, Solma. I may not have pronounced it right, but this is all in special remembrance of an icon that would take a great deal to fill his shoes in response towards his successes in sacrificing what he sacrificed, not just for himself, but for others, for millions and millions of people all over the world. This is definitely a monumental moment of a heroic hero that they're now taking him across the bridge in a buggy, and it looks to be mules, I don't know, maybe horses, but this is definitely a moment that needs to be etched in stone for ever and ever and ever, that is in correspondence and reference to the assassination of Kennedy, or not Kennedy, but Lincoln. This is all in response towards the movement that began with President Lincoln of the fulfillment of this now starting to become more basically manifesting itself to the point of today of seeing those dreams and those desires and those ideals come true. So yes, this is a monumental moment in what is happening here right now.
I think it had everything to do with his, not just his political humility, but a moral humility. Because John Lewis understood profoundly that the sacrifice of Selma was more than the heroic sacrifice of a person, but the heroic sacrifice of many people, a community, a race, the foot soldiers of Selma. He was mindful of Amelia Boynton's sacrifice on that bridge, and Jimmy Lee Jackson and so many others who lost their lives for the right to vote. So it's a measure of his humility. But when we think about renaming the bridge, we also have to think about the renaming of the Voting Rights Act, the renewed Voting Rights Act, a restored Voting Rights Act. So this moment of recognizing his legacy in the present is more than putting names on schools, on bridges, on legislation. It's about naming and claiming his legacy in the present for the future. So in other words, securing voting rights. In other words, getting into good trouble in his name. Like those school children in Virginia who changed the name of their school from Robert E. Lee to John Robert Lewis. That's what this moment is about. And so if his name is important, his name is most important when it is on our lips, speaking to our ideals, speaking to our aspirations, speaking to the future.
I want to reconfirm these are two horses that are pulling Brother John across this bridge. That he was basically mortally attacked, almost died of an injury to his head. But I also want to confirm that this is the transformation period that Mr. Lincoln first seen that was going to happen into the future at that time, that is now transfigurating itself into what we're seeing. So yes, this is very, very historical. Very historical. This is the same thing, as far as I'm concerned, as landing on the moon, or finding the Titanic, or some of the other historical events, finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, the opening of the first seal, the falling of the Berlin Wall. This is right up there on the very top of the chain, towards it being a very, very historical event. Very historical.
And that's a measure of his humility, but also the magnitude and measure of his life.
And his name attached to change, because that is what John Lewis is emblematic of.
That's right.
Lonnie,
That's right.
Talk about change. I mean, you know.
But have you noticed that none of these commentators that I'm listening to of this event are even mentioning President Lincoln, who sacrificed his life to free the slaves? They're not going back to the original core of origin of where this movement actually began, because it didn't just begin with Brother John Lewis. It didn't just begin with JFK. This was a movement that America has been enacting upon ever since the assassination of a great leader during the Civil War, to be able to free the slaves, to treat all men equal. So it just tells you the non-essential correspondence to this movement, that they should be bringing up Lincoln. This is part of the experiment that they keep talking about, putting all races together towards them being equal.
The late congressman was able to twist a lot of arms, do a lot of lobbying, convincing, to get that African American Museum of Culture and History in that very place where it is. That's where your relationship really took on a whole new level. Describe that experience and what those memories have been like.
Well, I think there was something amazing about John Lewis's resiliency. I mean, he introduced legislation to create the National Museum of African American History and Culture for nearly 2 decades. And he worked the political system. He finally got the support that allowed President Bush to sign the legislation in 2003. And yet, for 14 years beyond that, he worked with me to help to create that museum. And I mean, he worked. One of the things he said is, you're a historian, so I want you to feel the past. And I didn't understand what he said. And then he said to me, go with me on one of my pilgrimages through Alabama and Mississippi, and to walk the civil rights movement with John Lewis.
Exactly.
To see it through his eyes.
Right.
Gave a historian a sense of how important this was, not just because it happened, but because it has a continuing relevance and relevancy.
Right.
And one of the things that is so powerful to me was that John Lewis really was committed to building a museum that would help America remember
Yes.
all of its history, in a way that was sometimes painful,
Yes.
but at other times it was ripe with resiliency and optimism.
It was rewarding in other times. It was sad and remorseful in a whole lot of times, but in other times it was also uplifting.
So working with John Lewis for 14 years was a gift, because every time I needed something, he would come over and say to me, "Brother, what do you need?" And you forget, in one way, this is John Lewis. I was so, my God, it's John Lewis. But on the other, he was somebody who said, "I'm a worker for change."
This is the reason why that we should be inspired by this man. Of some of the material that I have put out to my viewers towards, do not let your world rule you, but rather you rule your world. And Congressman John Lewis done just exactly that. He dictated towards where he was going, what he was going to do, and went through the resistance and went through the hula hoops and suffered the pains and the knocks and still kept going. He did not lose sight of his vision. He did not lose sight of his momentum. Though at times he was slowed down, though at times he may have been knocked down, slowed down, whatever word that you want to use, in being distracted, he maintained his objective. That's one of the greatest things about Congressman John Lewis. And of course, we probably would have seen the very exact same thing out of Martin Luther King, but he was sadly taken from us by an assassin's bullet. I pray to God that one day I will see the true manifestation of the dream, or of the desire that began with the Lord Jesus Christ, towards him being that cornerstone of seeing one day a temporary peace or a utopia pertaining to the elect or the meek here up onto the earth, towards a great revival and a great powerful movement of the very things that Christ seen over 2,000 years ago, that was foretold of it going to occur even in the year 2020. I look forward to seeing those very same ideals, those very same prophecies, those very same visions that similar people have seen in this event, towards the event of let the wheat grow with the tares until time of harvest. Once more, let's none of us forget in this historical moment that it was Abraham Lincoln that looked upon these matters in a deeper, somber way, that said these people are human beings too. These people deserve to be treated just like everybody else too. And it took from 1865 or 1864, I don't know, forgot now the exact date whenever Lincoln was assassinated, but it took to then to now, which is give or take about 150 years, to be able to see this movement transfigurate itself in the form that we're seeing this right here. Because if this would have been in a communist-controlled country, over in Russia or China, or in places in South America, and maybe even Mexico, I don't know. But if it would have been in other countries, you would not be seeing what you're seeing right now towards the dreams and the desires of so many people, especially Congressman John Lewis. See them manifest themselves by him going over this bridge. And just like the commentator said, we all have bridges. We all have stumbling blocks. We all have temptations and trials and obstacles that we must go over. As long as there's air in our lungs and there's life within our body, we must continue on this quest that our Heavenly Father has been a part of towards making sure that we integrate the way that we're supposed to integrate, not just as believers versus non-believers, not just as white versus black, or red and yellow versus white, or vice versa, but in all sectors across the board, in every continent, in every country, we should learn to adapt in colonizing and understanding each other's differences, but at the same time respecting each other by giving each other the same amount of dignity and the same amount of respect and remembrance of that in which what we do in other people's lives. Because whenever it's all said and done with, at the foot of the cross, we are equal. We're all equal. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, yellow, red, Russian, Canadian, American, South American, Mexican, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Australia, Ireland, African. It doesn't matter. We're all equal at the foot of the cross. For Christ said, whosoever believeth in me, whosoever, that they shall not perish, but that they shall have everlasting life.
And part of that change is building this museum. So let me help you craft a place that will change America forever. And that's what I think.
What a legacy. Victor is in Montgomery, and that will be the next stop for the casket of the congressman. So, Victor, what will happen? Can you paint a picture a little bit more on what will happen in Montgomery?
So as the motorcade travels from Selma, the 42 miles to where I am now, it will travel up Dexter Avenue, which is the same road at which in 1965, on March 25th, the thousands of people who walked for the second march after what happened to the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, that same path, that same road, and it will come here to the Alabama state capitol. The governor, Kay Ivey, will welcome. There will be a short ceremony once the congressman's casket arrives here, and then there will be, currently scheduled for 4 hours, of people who have come here to the Capitol to pay their respects to pass through. Of course, there will be social distancing and masks required because of the mask mandate here in Alabama, but also because of the general pandemic that's happening here. Right across the street, we know that there is Dexter Avenue, now King Memorial Baptist Church, where Dr. King was a pastor before he went to Ebenezer in Atlanta. There will likely be some people who will be there as well to celebrate the congressman. But in this building, there is so much history that talks about, or at least highlights, illuminates the progress that this state, this country has made. But still, in the conversation about Congressman Lewis, we know that even in his last days, he was telling people who were speaking with him. I spoke with Sonona Clayton yesterday, also with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who spoke with him, and they were still talking about him saying, do not give up, do not give in, keep up the fight, keep the faith. We know that after the weakening of the Voting Rights Act in 2000, 2013, his focus was there as well. He died believing that one day this country would become the beloved community, but still there was work to do. So in the honoring of Congressman Lewis, as we're seeing people now start to come out and start to wait as they've watched on television what happened in Selma, and they know the travel will come here, we know that that will be on their minds, that there was a lot done in his life and he contributed to much of it, but he still tells all the people who are here that they cannot rest on this moment, that there is still work to do. That will be part of the tribute to the late congressman.
Yeah, the late congressman's contributions and accomplishments in the legislature are immense, and we're going to delve into some of that a bit later. Thank you so much.
I want to weigh in one more time here on this particular event as they're fixing to go to Montgomery. I worked for Donnie and Brandon there at Montgomery Body and Paint, just south of Montgomery. Worked for them while doing contract work for the governor there on other state trooper automobiles that had been involved in an accident or a crash. Out of all the places that I've ever been, and I've been to many, pertaining to states, cities, towns, and I'm not saying that it's not this way in New York or it's not this way in other predominant black areas, but in all the areas that I have ever been ventured off into, it was Montgomery, Alabama, that taught me that a black man or a black woman has the same qualifications of doing the auto body industry type work that I was involved in for 35 years, towards either turning wrenches, cutting vehicles in half, or painting cars. It was Montgomery, Alabama that taught me that there was more to this industry or occupation other than a white man's occupation. I think I'm going to say something, and I hope that I'm not going to be wrong about what I'm going to say, pertaining to another industry that I took note of back whenever I was in the industry, pertaining to ironworking, hanging steel, going way up high, working on Empire State Buildings and high rises. I've never personally worked on, per se, a Empire State Building or something above 200 feet, which is basically 20 stories. But from all of my knowledge, that industry was based around the Native Americans because they was not afraid of heights. And of course the Europeans that come into play towards following into their footsteps. As far as I know, I've never seen a black person that was walking on little bitty beams way up high and being a connector towards connecting Empire State Buildings together. As far as I know, I've never seen a female climbing beams and being a connector (200 stories above the ground, as far as I know, because that particular industry was predominantly graded off of the Native American industry that I had taken a part of, give or take, for about four and a half years before I wound up falling off of a 4-story building. And it's not to say that one race, not to discriminate against one race or the other, it's just that certain races has qualifications that other races don't, pertaining to fear factors and being scared of heights, And back during the big boom after World War I, whenever the iron started going up into the air, it was well known of Irishmen, Indian, and white races that was a part of that industry for years and years and years. Now, it may have changed since I have gotten out of it in the past 30 years, and there may be just as many black iron workers in Birmingham or Montgomery, Alabama, or in other parts of the world pertaining to New York as there are white ones. And if they are, my apologies, because I'm just not aware of it. But they did teach me in Montgomery, Alabama, because I had never been around black race people that worked on cars. I mean, you find them all the time that sell parts, good parts guys. You find them all the time that's estimators. You find appraisers. You find them all the time that's good cleanup men towards cleaning up cars and stuff. But to actually find them cutting cars in half, pulling cars back together again, painting cars to the point that they don't look like that they've never ever been involved in an accident, Montgomery, Alabama showed me a lesson. Once more, we're trying to pay a special tribute to Congressman John Lewis of the accomplishments that he made in his life towards being a heroic icon. We just want to say our deepest sympathies to the family, and may his soul rest in peace, and may they remember this man for his great courage and his charisma towards whenever he started something, he wanted to complete it, he wanted to finish it. In other words, he wasn't a procrastinator like I've turned out to be in the past 3 or 4 years since I've come back here to my home place here at 291 Thompson Road, in which I never used to be a procrastinator. Whatever that I started, I always finished. But I find myself now buying a water hose and not unrolling it until next year. I bought it this year because it was on sale, but I actually don't use it until next year. I find myself procrastinating stuff like that, to where I used to never procrastinate stuff. I'll start a project and I'll let it lay for a month or two before I ever get involved in actually doing it. I'll set things up. I'll buy this, buy that, get this lined up, get that lined up, get whatever that I need to do. But as far as me actually doing it right then and there, I find myself procrastinating more at the age of 59. And since I've went through what I've went through, more so today than what I ever have in my whole entire life. But once more, Brother John was not a procrastinator. He had a vision. He had an ideal. He was like Martin Luther King as far as having that dream and that desire that went along with that dream. Because it's one thing to have the dream, but not have the desire to fulfill the dream. It's kind of like peace. You know, the word peace sounds good. Kind of like duty or dedication or loyalty or dignity or pride. All these words sound good. They're good sounding words. But what good is the word peace if we're truly not striving towards that goal of living with each other in a peaceful setting, the way that the Bible intends for us to live? I admire his gun-ho. I've watched him again and again and again on the floor talk. He was not only an elegant speaker, but he was a very passionate speaker. Sometimes he was loud. Sometimes he probably sounded obnoxious to some people. And yes, there was times that he was falsely accused of being a bootlegger preacher, because he would get up there and tell you what he thought. But he was trying to emphasize upon every point. That way you could get a bigger, fulfilling picture of what that he was talking about. He wanted to be sure that you understood completely, equivalently, totally in what that he was trying to accomplish. And that's the reason why that he was so passionate and he was so articulate in what that he would try to get his message across to. May his soul rest in peace of the accomplishments that not only him, but people like him and his surrounding parties that helped him along. May his soul rest in peace for that in which what he has accomplished through the Heavenly Father.
Watch everyone. We're gonna take a short break, but stay with me as we continue to watch these incredible moments from Selma, Alabama, where Congressman John Lewis's casket makes a final procession over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. All this during our special coverage. It continues after this.
The song that comes into play as I was watching the final moments there is "There Will Be Peace in the Valley Someday." The well-known gospel. There will be peace in the valley someday, someday. It goes on to say that there will be no more crying. There will be no more weeping, which is a manifestation of the book of Revelations that talks about God himself will wipe away our tears and recreate a new heaven and a new earth, for all the former things will have passed, and God will be our God. We will live with our God forever and forever, and Christ will be that shining light, that beacon that will be with us forever and ever and ever. Because once we enter into the kingdom, there is no color. There is no black. There is no white. There is no poor. There is no rich. There is no smart. There is no dumb. There is no cripple. There is no dividing lines in heaven. We will be even as he was, transfigurated towards being that angel of light. And we will all be as one, in unison, for one. May Congressman John Lewis and his accomplishments live on forever. In Yahshua, Yahweh's name. And good luck to all of us, and shalom.